I've been building things with AI that are more complex than I could personally write, inspect, or fully hold in my head. That is obviously true for me as a vibe coder. I never learned to code in the traditional sense, but I think this reaches beyond vibe coding. Even if you are a real engineer, AI is increasingly allowing you to build systems whose total complexity exceeds what you can personally reason through line by line. And that creates a pretty important question. How do you build something beyond your own understanding while still remaining meaningfully in control? I do not think control comes from understanding every internal detail. I think it comes from protecting your judgment, positioning yourself correctly around the work, and only formalizing patterns after reality has exposed them. There are 4 main things I am starting to learn. Do not reach for determinism too early. Use determinism as a guardrail, not a creative ceiling. Position yourself correctly in relation to the work. Pave the cow paths. Formalize patterns only after the path becomes clear. I do not think I have all of that solved, but I have been building this way for a while now, and those are the ideas I want to work through. Right now, one of the main things I'm trying to do is automate more of the process of making YouTube videos. I have built a system where a group of AI agents can each develop complete segments of a video. They can work with footage, animation, images, diagrams, text, interface recordings, whatever the segment actually needs. Above them is a director agent. It runs on Opus and uses a production method I have been developing to interpret the script, establish the overall visual direction, divide the work, and keep the individual segments feeling like one video. That system sits inside a broader framework I have built for coordinating agents around real work. I am still figuring out what should be automated, where human judgment needs to stay involved, and how to remain in control as the system becomes more capable than I can personally inspect. The first trap is reaching for determinism too early. When you cannot fully read or understand a system, rules feel like safety. You want the machine to remember what you cannot, so you start adding hard rules, validators, absolute constraints, green checks, automated approvals, deterministic process controls. And some of that is necessary. If something can silently delete work, select the wrong file, lose important state, or cost money, then I probably do want the system enforcing it instead of relying on my memory. But early in a system, you often do not understand the problem well enough to know what deserves to become absolute. A premature rule can preserve a misunderstanding. It can turn an old workaround into permanent doctrine. It can make the system confidently enforce something whose original reason no longer exists. I ran into that while working directly with the director agent at the head of my YouTube production system. That system is part of a larger effort to automate more of how I make these videos. And I have run into this problem multiple times during that effort. Some rules were created too early. They made sense in the moment, but then the tools changed, the workflow changed, or the problem they were meant to solve disappeared. The rules survived anyway, and instead of protecting the system, they created contradictions. Those contradictions burn unnecessary tokens. They create unnecessary confusion. They slow down production. And because a rule sounds authoritative, it can make an outdated assumption look settled. The problem is not determinism. The problem is certainty that has not been earned. Some things absolutely should become rules early, especially when getting them wrong can delete work, select the wrong file, lose important state, cost money, or otherwise break the system. But that leads to the second thing I am learning. Use determinism as a guardrail, not a creative ceiling. When you make a system too deterministic, you begin to stifle the same creativity that makes the AI useful. The AI needs room to interpret the situation. It needs room to propose something unexpected. It needs room to make choices based on context rather than simply following a fixed recipe. But that freedom cannot be unlimited either. The system still needs boundaries that stop it from damaging the work. In my YouTube production system, we framed this as the difference between things that break and things that bore. You do not want the video to break. You do not want the wrong version to ship. You do not want an important constraint to disappear between agents. You do not want files destroyed, costs ignored, or assets used incorrectly. Those are concrete failures. Once you understand how they happen, you can build hard rules to prevent them. But you also do not want the video to become boring. You do not want technically correct AI slop. You do not want something with no substance, no creativity, and no taste. A system might decide that every shot needs to change after a few seconds because static visuals can become boring. But sometimes holding on one image is exactly what a difficult idea needs in order to land. It might decide that repeated visuals are always wrong, but sometimes repetition creates continuity and reinforces the point. The system can flag those choices. It can show me where something has been static for a long time. It can notice repetition. It can surface patterns that deserve attention, but it should not automatically decide that variation equals creativity or that compliance equals taste. The goal is to give the AI enough freedom to make something interesting, while keeping enough structure around it that the work remains reliable. And that principle goes beyond making YouTube videos. The same tension exists in software development. If every implementation choice is predetermined, the agent loses its ability to solve the actual problem in front of it. But if there are no boundaries, it can make creative decisions that damage data, introduce instability, increase costs, or move the product away from what the owner actually intended. So the balance is not rules versus creativity. It is rules that protect creativity. Use determinism to define the boundaries of acceptable failure. Then leave enough room inside those boundaries for judgment, adaptation, and taste. The third thing I am learning is that when you are building beyond your own knowledge, control depends a lot on where you position yourself in relation to the work. Sometimes I stay conceptual and work with ChatGPT to clarify, translate, and summarize. Sometimes I sketch diagrams on paper to clarify what is going on. And sometimes I move right up to the terminal to see what is actually happening. Each vantage point provides a different kind of control. The OODA loop helps here. Observe, orient, decide, act. You observe what the system is doing. You orient by comparing it to your intent and the evidence. You decide what needs to change. And then you act. Then you check again. This is not a one-time loop. It becomes a way of staying connected to a system that you cannot fully hold in your head. The OODA loop comes from fighter pilot thinking. It was not a productivity acronym. It was about surviving in fast-moving environments where your position changes what you can see, how much time you have, and what decisions are even available. That connects cleanly with this idea of choosing where to stand in relation to the work. The fourth thing I am learning is what I think of as paving the cow paths. That comes from the idea of waiting to see where people actually walk before you pave a sidewalk. In this context, it means letting real work reveal the patterns before you formalize them. If you harden a process too early, you may lock in misunderstandings. But if you wait and watch the patterns emerge, then formalizing them actually supports what is working. There is a classic story from university campus design. Instead of deciding every sidewalk in advance, you let people walk first. Over time, the grass shows you where the real paths are, and then you pave those, not the theoretical ones, the real ones. That is what I mean by paving the cow paths. In AI or systems work, let real work create the trails. Notice where the same needs and judgments show up again and again. Then formalize those. That is when a repeated pattern can become a rule, a validator, a durable workflow, a system boundary, or an automated check. If you pave too early, you spend the project digging up concrete because you built the road in the wrong place. If you wait forever, the system stays muddy and unreliable. The skill is recognizing the moment where the path is clear enough to formalize. And I think that is how something genuinely sophisticated begins to emerge. Not because you designed every rule perfectly in advance, not because you understood the whole system from the beginning, but because the architecture gradually grew out of observed reality. You noticed what actually broke. You preserved the judgment where judgment was still needed. You moved closer or farther away from the work, depending on the problem, and you formalized the paths only after they became visible. When I started building this way, I think I assumed the goal was to make the system more and more deterministic until I could trust it. But I do not think that is quite right anymore. The goal is not to turn the whole creative process into a machine with a rule for every situation. Because if I make it too deterministic, I start throwing away the reason I wanted generative AI in the first place. I am not using AI just because it can follow instructions. I am using it because it can interpret, adapt, synthesize, and create. In that sense, the relationship is closer to managing a very capable specialist. A good manager does not try to do every job better than the person they are managing. They set direction, define boundaries, protect the goal, and then give that person enough room to actually do the work. That is the balance I am trying to find with AI. Enough structure so the system does not break, and enough freedom that it can still use the capabilities that made it worth bringing in at all. The goal is to know where determinism actually belongs. Use hard rules where failure is clear. Do not let old rules linger just because they were written early, and do not automate the taste out of the work. Position yourself where you can still observe, orient, decide, and act, even when the system is too big to hold in your head. And when real patterns keep showing up, that is when you pave the path. That is what building beyond your understanding feels like to me right now. Not total comprehension, but staying meaningfully in control.